Yo, yo, we are live. Happy Friday. I see some of you are already active in the chat, so let's get into it. Uh, First one from Shanil Patel. And this is something that I've been thinking about for the last week or so as people talk about the Lakers offseason and where they stand in the West. So I want to start with this one. But hey, Jovan, I feel like the doom and gloom of the Lakers offseason so far has almost made the Lakers roster underrated. Adding a healthy Vando and Gabe are two huge pieces, especially for the perimeter defense. This is a really good point. And to me, when I look at the West and I look at the Lakers' upside and their potential, I tentatively slot them as the number 5 team in the West right now. I think that, I would comfortably, like, OKC to me right now is the best team in the West. I don't think that's up for debate. I think they've had a great offseason, adding Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. But OKC aside, the Lakers were right there. With OKC in the regular season last year, with Minnesota, with Dallas, Denver's been the one team that's been a thorn in their side, but they just lost arguably either their fourth or fifth best player, fourth or fifth best starter. And that's a big blow to Denver. And I think that's going to make them a bit more vulnerable. I think Christian Braun can slot in and give you 80%, maybe even 90% of what KCP gave them, but they are not now replacing that Christian Braun slot in the rotation. So Denver is a bit more vulnerable in their standing in the West. But I would put OKC, Denver, Dallas, and Minnesota in some order above the Lakers. And that would slot for me the Lakers at number 5. But comparing them to the Clippers, who lost PG, the Warriors, who I think have rebounded nicely from losing Klay Thompson and Chris Paul, but I still already thought that the Lakers were better than the Warriors. Looking at, like, Memphis is going to bounce back. Houston's getting better. San Antonio should be better. New Orleans added DeJounte Murray, but I still think, as we saw at the end of last season, the Lakers were better than the Pelicans. So if you basically run it back with this Lakers group and you have a healthy Vando, you have a healthy Gabe Vincent, you have another year of continuity and chemistry, you have JJ Redick starting either Rui or Vando and playing those guys more next to LeBron and AD, and you have Max Christie taking a jump and being empowered and actually having a consistent role in the rotation as one of the few two-way guys on the roster. And then Dalton Connect coming in and his movement shooting, and JJ Redick knowing the right ways to use him offensively, and him being a steal, dropping the Lakers at number 17. Like, all of a sudden, I do think there's a chance that this team is just better than last season. And it really comes down to LeBron and AD's health. And, then do you make a separate move? Like, where's the hole in the roster? And to me, the hole in the roster is still perimeter defense, where outside of Max, Gabe, and Vando, and those three guys each have their own holes in their game, like the perimeter defense is a bit shaky still. So I'd probably put the Lakers right now at number 5. I think New Orleans is probably pushing them right there for that number 5 spot in the West. But I still think that's to me the part where, like, if you're trying to make the argument for the Lakers making a move, like, I see people talking about them like they're the 9th or 10th best team in the West. And if they make a move, it's going to put them somewhere in like the 5, 6, 7 range, where I see it. I just view it differently. I view them as like the 5th best team in the West. And if they make the right move, they could jump up to the 3rd best team in the West or the 2nd best team in the West. It's going to be tough to catch OKC, but then again, like, the Lakers have had some physical advantages over OKC. It's been a good matchup for them, dating back to last season. So, maybe they continue to overwhelm. Like, AD has dominated Chet, and Hartenstein is a much bigger and bulkier defender, and it is a better, I think, matchup against AD compared to Chet, but I don't think he solves all of OKC's issues against the Lakers in that specific matchup. So I think the Lakers, with the right move here, could elevate into that top 3 in the West. And once you're in the top 3, it really just comes down to matchups and health and playoff brackets and the seeding and all that stuff. So I'm a bit higher on the Lakers, I think, than the consensus. I think especially like the national consensus. So I believe that if the Lakers can make the right move, and it's going to be tricky, but if they can make the right move, I think it puts them with the elite in the West. Let's see. We got a couple of super chats here. First one from Amon Brar 1992. First off, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Hey, Jovan, Lakers make a trade. What is the trade? Your prediction? I think some form, at a minimum, it's tough to say what type of deal, because as I've reported, Jeremy Grant, Kyle Kuzma, Cam Johnson, and Dorian Finney-Smith are the names that I've heard that are both available on the trade market, and that the Lakers have had conversations with those teams about those players. Now, if you look at the Lakers' recent trade history, a lot of times it comes out of left field in terms of it's like there will be, like I look at, I mean, we could go down the list of like Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, Kyrie Irving, DeJounte Murray, Zach LaVine. Like there's been all these Bojan Bogdanovic. Like there's been all these guys that have been tied to the Lakers at various points. Gary Trent Jr. We could go on with the guys that have been linked and linked to the Lakers multiple times through summers and through trade deadlines and through seasons. And like those guys rarely end up actually getting traded to the Lakers. And then it ends up being like Russ. There had been some, originally it was potentially the Sacramento deal, and DeRozan was in the mix. Dame was in the mix, Bradley Beal. There were several star level guys. And then the Russ situation started to pop up about like, I want to say it was like 7 to 10 days or so before he ended up getting traded to LA. But since then, like there was no smoke on Rui Hachimura. That one just came out of nowhere. I had reported, I want to say a week or two before, that I was hearing Utah was, it was between Utah and Toronto as like the most likely trade candidates with the Lakers at the 2023 trade deadline. But I did not have the part about D'Angelo Russell being involved in that trade, and that ultimately expanding out to a 3-team trade. And I thought Mike Conley was going to end up being a Laker, but he ended up being rerouted to Minnesota, and D'Lo ended up in LA. So like sometimes some of these trades you'll start to get wind of them a little bit before, but for the most part, the Lakers tend to operate in the shadows, behind the scenes. They move in silence. So they will be attached to certain players, and there will be a lot of buzz with it. But then more often than not, that's not the guy. They end like that. The deal falls through for whatever reason. Sometimes people use the Lakers for leverage. Sometimes there's the Lakers tax, like all this different stuff. But so if I had to guess or make an educated guess, I think the Lakers have to do something to get under the second apron. And that could be LeBron taking a slight pay cut, though I think if the option is trading away a minimum guy or LeBron taking a pay cut, I think LeBron and the Lakers would just prefer to trade away the minimum guy. And they have a glut at the back end of the roster of guys that just aren't good enough to be rotation caliber guys on a good team. So I look at the Lakers potentially doing some type of 2-player vet minimum salary dump, where if you could trade, and the names I've heard specifically, and I've already talked about this before, but Cam Reddish and Christian Wood, I think if they're ranking Jackson Hayes, Cam Reddish, Christian Wood, it would be, Jackson Hayes. I mean, Jackson Hayes was the best of the 3 last year, and especially that second half of the season that he had. And I think the chemistry that he had with LeBron and some of those second unit minutes. So I think the Lakers, and he's the youngest, and so he was the one that was the most surprised. Like I knew Christian Wood and Cam Reddish were going to opt in because they didn't have much of a market. Jackson Hayes was the one guy that I'd heard, like, could someone give him the biannual, or could someone give him maybe part of their taxpayer MLE up to that like 5.5, probably a little less, but like maybe somewhere in that range. So Jackson Hayes, I think, was the guy that the Lakers would like to keep if they can keep one of these vet minimum guys. So trading a Christian Wood and a Cam Reddish, and likely attaching a second round pick in protecting it, maybe like top 40 protected or something, to some team with cap space, or a team that has the roster and cap flexibility to take those guys on. And then so you create a couple roster spots, you shed upwards of like $5.5 million, you're 1.1 million over the second apron. So that gets you to about 4.4 under. And then that gives you a little bit of wiggle room you could sign LeBron to the full max. You sign Max Christie, you don't have to try and restructure his deal. And then you could use almost all of that taxpayer MLE, which again is about $5.5 million. And you could use all that and right under the second apron. And then you also have an empty roster spot in case you do a trade during the season, or in case there's a buyout guy or someone becomes available and you want to try to add that player. So ideally, if the Lakers could honestly do like a 3-for-1 or a 3-for-0 and dump like multiple guys. I think that would be the preferred outcome for them. It just gets tricky with team because then the team has to decide: are we keeping this guy? Are we waiving this guy? Like, how does it affect our salary situation? So there's a lot there with what. So if I had to make a guess at a minimum, it's doing some type of consolidation trade where they dump a couple of these minimum guys. As for the bigger trades, like I know the Lakers are being active and aggressive right now. It's tough to say if one of those is actually going to happen. And I think they're a bit hamstrung right now in terms of their actual assets because they're trying to keep at least one of these first round picks in most of these talks because none of these guys, like they didn't love the idea of giving up 2 first round picks for DeJounte Murray. Now, if you look at a Jeremy Grant or a Kyle Kuzma, like those guys are even a step or two or a notch or two rather below a DeJounte Murray. So they don't want to give up 2 picks for that caliber of player, as they shouldn't want to. But at the same time, the market is the market. The prices are the prices. And if they want to improve this team, they're going to have to give up some draft capital. And there's really just no realistic way to upgrade this roster without trading at least one of their picks, or at least upgrade it in a substantial enough way where it, again, elevates them from like a 5 or 6 seed up into that like top 2, top 3. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. But I think if I had to pick right now, I would say at a minimum, a consolidation trade to dump a couple guys. And then from that point on, a bigger deal. Let's see. Next one here from Vinny Jaj. Sorry if I butchered that. Can we get GTJ? That's Gary Trent Jr. Think they make trade very soon. Lakers need to make moves. Feel like Rob taking too long. Gary Trent Jr., I think on paper, his market should be the non-taxpayer MLE, which is upwards of $12.9 million. But I don't right now see that team out there. Like, it feels like he would have already signed with that suitor, hypothetically. I mean, again, there's a lot of dominoes right now, a lot of moving parts. So he's not a high priority for most teams. So, he could just be waiting out to see how it shakes out and what's his best option. I would love him on the taxpayer MLE. I think that would be a great addition for the Lakers. I know like he doesn't have the size that you ideally want from the perimeter, but especially if you are doing a trade where you're losing a D'Lo or you're losing a Gabe, adding another guard, then in that case makes a little bit more sense. And you can shift some of the ball handling and playmaking to Austin, to LeBron. If you keep Gabe, maybe you trade D'Lo, you keep Gabe, then Gabe can kind of step up. And it's not ideal. Like ideally, if you are trading D'Lo, you could bring back a high-level ball handler, but you can't plug every hole with one trade or even a couple necessarily. Like, I think the Lakers are going to have a hole if they trade D'Lo. Obviously, they need another lead ball handler type. And again, they could shift some of that more to Austin, more to LeBron. But like, I still think you want one more solid ball handler. I still think they need help on the wings, at least one more 3-and-D 2-way type. And then I think they need a better backup center than a Jackson Hayes and a Christian Wood. And it's tough sure, you look at the trade machine and come up with different trades that address all three. But if it's a 3-team trade, if it's a 4-team trade, because I've seen some of these like elaborate 4 teams, 15 players involved. And it's like, that's really tough to get 4 teams on the same page with a trade and how they value certain guys and how they value certain picks and like all these different factors that go into it. So I think the more teams involved, the more complicated it is. So for me, I would say in terms of like GTJ at like taxpayer MLE, I think that's a great value. And I think he is someone that could play and again, like be in a backcourt. I think the Lakers should use more Austin Max backcourts next season, but I could also see GTJ in those backcourts next to Austin as well. And at that point, you're going with 5 guys like 6'5" and above, and you have maybe not like the best defensive backcourt, but you at least have a certain level of size there. And then also obviously GTJ with his shooting. And I think JJ Redick using him in creative ways, like it makes sense from an offensive fit. So I like that. I think he is an option for them if he's willing to. I mean, they have to create that flexibility under the second apron. And then he also that has to be the peak of his market, or he has to be willing to take that discount to come to LA. But he's a guy that, I mentioned him earlier, and guys that have been attached to the Lakers for multiple years now. So I could, like, the Lakers have had interest in him for a while, and I believe would still have interest in him, especially at that price. But it just comes down to what's his market like, and can they clear the roster flexibility and the cap flexibility under that second apron. Next one from, is it Sheriff or Sharif? Hey, Jovan, love your work. Are we at least trying to offer anything for Lauri or Kessler? Any free agents waiting on the Lakers? So I don't have, like, again, like, GTJ is someone that I've heard could be available in that range. So that's potentially someone that the Lakers could add. Again, there's a lot of dominoes, a lot of factors that go into that. As far as Lauri, I'm getting a lot of Lauri questions. Just the price is really high. Like, the Jazz are trying to find a Mikal Bridges level price for him, according to multiple reports, and according to what I've heard behind the scenes. Like, just the price for him is incredibly high. And remember, Mikal Bridges went for 5 first-round picks. So the Lakers, technically, they could manipulate that 2027 first-round pick that they owe Utah. Remove I believe it's top 4 protected. They could remove the protection on that. They could also send their 2 firsts, and then they also have 3 swaps. So you could technically do something like 2 firsts, 3 swaps, removing the protections on the 1 pick. But then that's probably going to cost you at least, Austin Reeves and whatever. I think Lauri's making about 18. So I don't know, Austin Reeves, JHS, Austin Reeves. You got to figure out the salary there. But at that point, it's like you're really mortgaging all of your future, all of your assets. And I don't even know if Utah would do that. That might not be enough for what they're looking for. But I do think it would take basically every tradable, like, positive asset that the Lakers have. And I just don't know if that's even enough for Utah. But for the Lakers, it's like, if you're trading, if you're trading Austin for Lauri, and maybe even, let's just say, like, Austin and Vando or something like that. And again, you got to figure out the salary. At that point, like, you are losing. I mean, in my opinion, you're losing your third best player, and you're getting a better third best player, but it's still a blow to the top. Like, ideally, you keep Austin and you add a Lauri, or you keep Austin and you add a Jeremy Grant, you add Kyle Kuzma, you add one of these higher level, like, combo forwards, and you're adding, either someone better than him or someone just as good as him. And now you're creating some more depth at the top of your roster. But if you're swapping Austin for Lauri, like, yes, you are getting better. He's a better player. There's no doubt about that. But it's still, like, I think it still creates a little bit of a hole at the top of your roster, because I do think there's a bit of a gap there in terms of, like, guys I would trust in, like, the playoffs. So to me, Austin's on that list. And I think if I'm the Lakers, I try to keep him, especially when I look at the contract and some of the guys that are producing at similar level. Like, look at Franz, and Franz is also, I would pick him above Austin, but, like, look at his production and look at Austin's. And of course, there's age and there's different things in there. So I'm not trying to, it's not an apples to apples comparison. I just think if you look at, like, the contract he's on versus the contract Austin's on, it's like Austin's a really, really good value on that contract. The Lakers still have him for 3 more years, technically 2, because I think he'll probably opt out, but, like, 2 to 3 more years. And that's just a really good value. So ideally, like, you can mortgage your future for a guy like Lauri, but I think there's also the matter of, like, he's technically an expiring contract, and there's some you got to figure out the extension with him. And I think it's like August 6th is the date he can extend. So there's a lot of factors there. Kessler, I really like, but I've also heard that the price is high for him. I mean, if it's just a first and matching salary, I would do that if I'm the Lakers. But they've been reluctant to give up their first and really kind of selective with that. But I do think Kessler, I've heard they've talked to Utah, and kind of unclear which players have been involved, but by process of elimination, I would assume Kessler would be one of those guys, and Colin Sexton would likely be one of those guys. And I'm sure they've asked about Lauri, but with the price, it's just seems unrealistic to me. Let's see. Ernest Booker. Thank you again for all the people doing super chats. What's the chances on Zach or DeMar to LA? So Zach, I think the Lakers could make it work if they really want to, from a cap sheet perspective of, like, matching salaries. It would have to be something like D'Lo, Rui, and then you could go Vando or Gabe, and you're basically right there. Zach's making $43 million next year. So you could get in that ballpark with those three guys. Now it is a 3-for-1 trade. I'm sure Chicago would likely try to put someone else in the deal just from like a roster construction perspective of they don't really want to take on 2 extra contracts. So that could be a haggling point. And then if they're willing to give up a first round pick, like I know Anthony Irwin has been banging this drum of Zach LaVine to LA. I'm a bit skeptical, especially if the Lakers are keeping Austin, which I believe they would fight to keep Austin, and that would be a line in the sand that they wouldn't cross. Just because looking at an Austin Zach LaVine backcourt, I think it poses some of the similar problems as like an Austin D'Lo backcourt, where Zach LaVine is a better player than D'Lo, but there's kind of similar players in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Like Zach LaVine's obviously more athletic, more explosive. I think he's a better scorer overall, but you could argue he's just as bad, if not a worse defender. I think he's probably a little better because he's more athletic. He is bigger than D'Lo, but D'Lo is certainly a better passer, and last year at least was a better 3-point shooter and a better high volume 3-point shooter. So like, I think there's a bit of a trade-off there where Zach is like the more reliable offensive weapon and is a bit more athletic and gives you some of that dynamism that D'Lo doesn't necessarily give you, but D'Lo is a better shooter and a better playmaker. So I think, again, Zach is the better player. He also comes with a monster contract. He's making 40 plus million over, not just this upcoming season, but 2 more years. He's got a player option for 49 million. I'm going to break some news. He's going to pick that up. I've made that joke before. Like he's going to pick up that player option for 49 million. So he's got a monster contract, and that's, you're really kind of, you're like basically committing to LeBron, AD, and Zach. And LeBron maybe is gone by that 3rd year. Maybe he retires or whatever. But like that's just a lot of money to tie in to those 3 guys. And I'm not even sold on Zach necessarily as a number 3 on a championship level team. To my recollection, he's never even been in the playoffs, I want to say, off the top of my head. So we don't even know what he would be like. And who knows, maybe he is great in like a number 3 role, and he's better than D'Lo has been in the playoffs, and like it is an upgrade. But I don't know if it's worth, like, yes, it's great to take on a first round pick, and maybe you can reroute that and get a different upgrade, and like that would be the one kind of path for me of like, if you can then make a second move with that first round pick to address some of the defensive concerns with Zach. But I just think if I'm looking at like a Zach Austin backcourt, I think it is a higher ceiling than an Austin D'Lo backcourt, but I think it still has some of the same limitations of like in a playoff series against a certain caliber of opponent, especially let's just say they make the finals and are playing the Celtics. Like I think that's going to be a tough backcourt defensively against a team like the Celtics that can really just pick on Zach and even pick on Austin in certain matchups. And like, I don't love that fit there. So to me, it's too similar to the Austin D'Lo backcourt. Now DeMar's still possible. It's just the problem is the Lakers. So, DeMar like had talked about in the past taking a hometown discount to play in LA and wanting to play for the Lakers. That was his childhood team. And obviously he's been everywhere recently with the Not Like Us song, and was at the Kendrick concert, was in the video. And like there's kind of been some DeMar in LA like buzz just overall over the last couple months. However, it's since come out that he does not want to take that non-taxpayer MLE, and that even some form of him taking like a $15 to $20 million contract he views as a discount. And he's not wrong, but for the Lakers, it just gets tricky to fit in. Like already, them figuring that out for Klay Thompson was going to be tricky, but them figuring it out for DeMar is also going to be tricky. And now, since they're pushing right above the second apron, not only like so, if they do a sign and trade for DeMar, they get hard capped at the first apron of 178. I want to say 178.5, if I'm not mistaken, or 178.6, somewhere in that range. So if you get hard cap there, the Lakers now need to shed. They need to trade out a certain amount of salary to fit in DeMar, because you don't want to be taking on even more salary. But then on top of that, you need to shed just over $11 million in that trade to fit DeMar in under the. So, you technically could do like the trade we talked about earlier of maybe you dump a couple vet minimum guys and you attach a second. So that clears 5.5. and then now you need to send out an additional. So maybe let's say DeMar is like 2 years, 36 million, so like 18 million a year, somewhere in that range. 2 years, 40 million, something like that. Then you send out D'Lo, and then you could do D'Lo and like JHS and like another minimum, or D'Lo and I mean maybe it's D'Lo and Vando, something like that. But then again, now you're decimating your depth, and you're creating other holes on the roster. Like now your perimeter defense is worse without Vando. You have less size, you have less athleticism, and yes, DeMar is maybe a better player than both of those guys, and comes with a certain level of cachet as like a third scorer, but you're creating defensive issues. And I think the biggest thing for the Lakers right now is like they need to be adding guys who can shoot and who could defend. And guys, and for as good, and I already talked about this in my video about DeMar and why I don't love the fit. For as good as DeMar is, and like if anyone's going to like DeMar DeRozan, it's me. I'm from LA. I went to USC. DeMar DeRozan's from LA. DeMar DeRozan went to USC. Like, objectively, like I've enjoyed watching him throughout his career. And he, by all accounts, he's a good dude. It's just he's not a good shooter, and he's not a good defender, and he's in his mid-30s. So it's like those three things would concern me if I'm the Lakers, then, and especially if I'm giving up, a D'Lo and a Vando, or a D'Lo and a Rui, or whatever the trade looks like, to create that space for DeMar and to get under the first apron. It's just it's a big price. So I guess to bring this full circle with both these guys, I would say both are very unlikely. I think Zach, again, it's similar. It's too similar to D'Lo in my opinion, and DeMar, I think it gets a little bit too tricky. The easiest way would have been LeBron taking a pay cut, and with that not happening, I just think it gets too tricky with LeBron at taking his max for the Lakers to then fit in DeMar. And I guess technically nothing has been signed yet, so LeBron could rescind it and change his mind, but like it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And it seems like DeMar is either going to end up most likely in Sacramento or in Miami. Okay, trying to catch up here. From Aiden Glenane, hey, why is Pelinka not doing anything? So this has been the question of the offseason, and I think it's fair. It is a fair critique, fair criticism of the Lakers' inactivity. I can say, and I have already reported at The Athletic, that the Lakers have been aggressive in reaching out to teams and trying to look for trades. At the same time, I think since the Russell Westbrook trade, the Lakers have been much more cautious in trades with their assets, particularly their first-round picks. And when it comes down to it, the Lakers, the contracts that the Lakers are trying to trade aren't exactly the most appealing contracts. Like there's a reason why they have to attach assets to them. Even a guy like D'Angelo Russell has been a pretty difficult contract to trade. There has not been much of a market for a guy like D'Lo. Gabe Vincent, there are legitimate concerns with his knee injury and with the way he recovered. And like I thought he looked, had some solid moments at the end of the last season. Obviously had a disappointing Denver series for the most part, but like that's not necessarily viewed as like a positive contract. Rui is I've said this many times on here, but like Rui is a very polarizing player where some people see the value in him, and some people are like, if we could slide this guy in as like our third forward, we could unlock him, and he brings this interesting ability to play both big and small depending on how you use him. At the same time, there are plenty of people around the league who still view it as they feel like it was a reactionary contract, that he had like one good month and the Lakers paid him off that, and they don't think he's very good. And they look at the Denver series and him kind of floating throughout that series and just how bad he was, and like they'll point to that and be like, this isn't a guy who we want in our program. So like Vando is I think he looked much better those last like 2-3 weeks before he got injured, but there are people who just look at, hey, Vando can't play in the playoffs because teams are just not going to guard him. They're going to put a center on him. They're going to put their worst defender on him, and it's going to be cheat off Vando. And I think the Lakers started to figure out better ways to use him as a cutter, as a screener, as a DHO guy. And I think JJ Redick is going to have to continue a lot of the progress that the Lakers made if they continue, if Vando's on the roster. But, it's just, it's like, and then JHS. I mean, I was talking about JHS as maybe like a late first round value, early second round. Like I've heard it is more like early second to mid second, and that's a guy you just took at number 17 a year ago. He's not even playing in summer league because of his back and the back procedure that he had to end the season. So it's like the Lakers, for the most part, the players they're trying to trade are largely neutral to negative trade values. So I think like at the end of the day, the Lakers need to do something. I believe if you really are serious about maximizing this window with LeBron and AD, you need to do something. I don't think running it back makes sense, and I think one of the Lakers' biggest issues the last couple of years has been entering the season knowing that they almost certainly had to make a trade by the trade deadline. 2 years ago, it was trading Russell Westbrook, and it ended up working out. But you still I mean, I think the resounding takeaway from that season was like, imagine if these guys had a full season together, and you might not have been able to do that trade at the beginning of the season. But imagine if the Lakers had that roster for the full season, would have been much better than having that roster for 20 something games before the playoffs. And then last year, they tried to trade D'Angelo Russell and no one would take him. And they could not fit, they couldn't figure it out with Atlanta. They couldn't figure it out with Brooklyn. And ultimately they had to keep him. But then you also had a disgruntled D'Angelo Russell who was in trade rumors for like 2 months. And it's understandably so. So it's like, I don't think I think the Lakers need to build out their roster now and over the next few weeks and enter the season with the roster you think can compete. And then if you want to make certain adjustments, then you make a trade at the trade deadline. But this whole run it back, let's just like see how, because then I also hear people say, well, let's see how good they actually are. But like you're judging an incomplete roster because this isn't the roster that they're going to want come playoff time. So like, is this roster good enough to compete for a championship? Probably not. Like I think they're the 5th best team in the West. I think they could win a round, maybe win 2, but I don't think this is a serious contending roster as constructed. So if you're going to judge it on that, you're going to come to the conclusion that this is not a serious contending roster, and you're going to say there's no point in making a move. So that's where I think it's a little bit like I don't necessarily agree with the logic of like, well, just stand pat, be patient, and don't do anything, and then wait till the season, because now you're bringing in all these other factors of like maybe someone gets injured and then that prevents you from making a move. Maybe the team gets off to just such a bad start that you're behind the 8 ball. And even if you do make a move, now all of a sudden you're trying to make up all this ground. And then that's to say nothing of disrupting chemistry and continuity and guys being in trade rumors. Like you don't want to deal with that. Next year, ideally, the Lakers don't have to make a trade at the deadline and they just have their roster from day one. So I think in terms of, so to go back to Rob and the inactivity, like I totally get it. I think it's fair to critique him. I think it's fair to have criticism for the inactivity. I will say, I know they've been active and aggressive and they don't have a lot of great assets, but I do think there's going to come a point let's say like mid to late July, where if the Lakers have not made a trade, like it's getting to the point where they need to do something. And even if it's not the best trade on paper, if it makes them a little bit better, I do think it's worth throwing in at first. And maybe if it's, depending on who the player is, maybe even a couple first, just because again, if you want to win a championship with LeBron and AD, the window is closing. The window is short. You have 1 to 2 more years. You got to go all in. You got to do something. That's just my take. Let's see. Homie 2 cent. Hi, Jovan. Random question. Outside of free agency, what's the dynamic like between reporters and a new head coach in the building? This is a good question. A little behind the scenes. So with that, I will say, like when the Lakers brought in Darvin Ham, we had an off the record lunch with him pretty early into his tenure. So we spent like an hour or so with him in one of the Lakers boardrooms at the facility, and just kind of shot the bleep and got to know each other a bit. And this was like the beat writers all in one room with Darvin Ham and Lakers PR. And I want to say Rob popped in for a little bit, but it was primarily just getting to know Darvin. So, and then, previous, so that's been a thing of having a lunch. So I assume at some point, probably closer to the beginning of the season, we'll have something like that with JJ. I think it's been obviously, he's been trying to hire his staff. It was right before the draft, right before free agency. So it's been a bit of a hectic time for the Lakers to try and kind of make that happen. But, I briefly covered JJ when, I covered the Lob City Clippers a bit. when I was just starting out. I was covering both the Lakers and the Clippers, and at that time it was easier for me to get credentials through the Clippers. So I was at more Clipper games, and I was around JJ for that stretch, but never. I was like early 20s. I didn't know what I was doing in an NBA locker room, so I didn't really build a rapport with him. But I did get to reintroduce myself at his introductory press conference. We had a brief interaction, and that was it. So, but I will be. I don't know. I doubt he's going to be at the Cali Classic. I'm going to be there, so that's partly why I got to go in like 15, 20 minutes. But I will certainly see him at Las Vegas Summer League, and I'm sure we will get to talk a bit more then. Let's see, Andrew H. What are the odds the Lakers make a deal today? Well, I hope they haven't made a deal since I've been on my phone. No, nothing has happened. I would say 15, 20%. Like, they don't have to make a deal today. I know like people are looking at tomorrow as like an unofficial deadline. They technically can drag out their they don't have to sign Max Christie tomorrow. Technically, that's the contract that will push them above the second apron. And even then, it really matters what they do throughout the summer in terms of getting back under the second apron. So they have a bit of a runway here to make some trades and make some moves. But I would say like in general, there is a sense of urgency of like the sooner the better. And at some point, like Gary Trent Jr. could be signed tonight or tomorrow or Sunday. And then all of a sudden, like that guy's gone, right? So the longer this drags out, the less of a market the Lakers are going to have in terms of like free agents for that taxpayer MLE. So I do think they should be trying to make that salary dump trade sooner than later. But I'm sure they're also trying to see if they can make a larger move and include one of those guys in that type of deal. So we shall see. Next question from Shabugan. Is this offseason already a colossal failure? No, I would not say it's a colossal failure. I will say I think it's too early to write off the offseason. That's my point. I think if they don't make a move, I think it's a failure. So I'm not like colossal is strong. Maybe it's semantics, and I'm just taking issue with like the additional emphasis on failure. But I will say like give it to July 30. If it's July 31st and the Lakers have not done some type of salary cutting move or some type of trade to improve the roster, I will agree with you and say it's a failure. And then that's it. But I think it's still a little early. Like they still have the Cali Classic. They still have Las Vegas Summer League. So I'd give it like 2 to 3 more weeks before I really judge it either way. But again, if they don't make a move, I do think it's a failure just because I think this is a good team. I don't think this is a great team with like a real championship ceiling personally, but we shall see. Mostly ill. Sorry, great reading skills there. Dwight McGee, AD asks for help every year. So Dwight is not in. I mean that ship has sailed. Dwight Howard is no longer an NBA caliber player. He's been out of the league for a couple of years, and I just don't. I think that like that's not the guy. JaVale has also slipped from being like JaVale has been on teams where they could use JaVale and his skill set and him as a backup center, and he always ends up getting outplayed by whoever his competition is for like second string. So I think JaVale, that ship has sailed too, in terms of like him being a viable rotation guy. The guy I'd wanted last year was Bismack Biyombo, but he wasn't great last season. So that's like it's tough. Like looking at I think the Lakers probably have to acquire a big on the trade market. Like looking at the contract that Andre Drummond got, I think it would have been like a taxpayer MLE for Andre Drummond would have been a great move. And that's a move that Lakers could have only made had they already cleared out that those roster spots and that cap flexibility, or just not giving out those player options. And I think if they didn't give out those player options, maybe Jackson Hayes is the only guy on the roster. I don't think Christian Wood and Cam Reddish are on this roster if the Lakers had not given them player options. So that's a whole other conversation and situation. But the whole like player option thing was just they went 0 for 3, honestly, because none of those guys had a market, and that's why they like if you opt into a minimum contract, you don't have a market, especially when you're not. It's not like those guys were crushing it in terms of like their roles or like their fits or whatever. It was just like they just didn't have a market. So I do think the Lakers, like I mentioned it earlier, like one of the 3 holes on this roster, or one of the 2 holes, and then third, if the Lakers trade D'Lo and don't replace him with a guard, is they need a more defensive minded, bigger body, center. And that's where like to me, Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes are similar in the sense of like, they're more offensive minded centers. Like Jackson Hayes, when he is rolling, he's getting lobs, he's getting offensive rebounds, and he's just being athletic and just above the rim on both sides of the floor, but more so offensively. Like he's making a lot of offensive impact plays, and he's effective in the short roll, and like he's operating in that way as a roller and as a downhill threat. With Christian Wood, I feel like we didn't see much of his offensive skill set that much last year because he didn't shoot the ball well. But ideally, he's a pick and pop big. He's a guy who can get you a bucket in the block or the elbow, and can face up, can turn around, can hit jumpers, got hook shots. He's also someone that could be effective on the offensive glass. But neither guy is much of an impact defender, and I think ultimately, like if you have 2 offensive, like the Lakers have trended toward offense, particularly at the backup center spot. And I think they need to, like, it's fine to have one of those guys, but you need a more defensive minded guy who can just hold down the fort for 5 to 10 minutes and just not be a layup line, and you not just give up offensive rebounds and putbacks and all that stuff. So like, that's easier said than done. And who knows, maybe a guy like Colin Castleton could take a step this year, or maybe the Lakers find a guy in the G League or on the buyout market at some point. But like, they're going to need to address that hole at some point. So I don't know, like look, and I haven't seen a Brook Lopez question yet, at least on the super chats. But I would say, Brook Lopez, like I personally would give, I know he's 36, but again, you have a 1 to 2 year window. I think Lakers should have kept Brook Lopez, and that's a whole other thing. Or Ivica, like if the Lakers had kept either Ivica Zubac or Brook Lopez, I think we're having a totally different conversation here, where this is like a team that's won a couple championships, because those 2 guys would be great fits next to Anthony Davis, particularly Brook Lopez, who like was molded in a lab to fit next to an AD or a Giannis as just this 3-and-D center, and is something of a unicorn, just because there's not many guys who can protect the rim at the level that Brook Lopez does, but also shoot 36+% on a high volume of threes, and basically not even go inside the arc offensively. And he can still be a post up guy. If you're going to put a guard on him, you could put Brook Lopez on the post and he'll go back to his New Jersey and Brooklyn days as a low post scorer. But for the most part, he's a stretch big who also protects the rim and is not a good rebounder. But if you have AD and LeBron next to him, I think you're going to be fine with and really, like, Milwaukee's been a good rebounding team with Brook Lopez. So it's often he's boxing out or he's contesting shots, and then that's where Giannis is coming in and getting the rebounds. So I'm not too worried about that. Like, yes, the age is a significant concern, but if you're looking at Brook Lopez through like a 1-year window, I mean, he might. I don't know if this is like a controversial take, but he might be the most impactful guy currently available. Like, it's probably between him and Jeremy Grant. And either way, you're going bigger in the front court. But I mean, I think the price certainly for Lopez would be less than Jeremy Grant. Portland's been asking for 2 first-round picks. So if you can get Brook Lopez for 1 first-round pick, I think you do it. Maybe if there's a way to like lottery protect it to kind of have a little bit of insurance against it. And I haven't heard specifics as to like, does Milwaukee want an unprotected first, or does any top 15 protected first? Like, there's flexibility there. But if you could even do like a top 10 protected first, I would personally consider that for Brook Lopez, given how well I think he would fit next to AD. And then you have the optionality to, and really, like, I don't think it's going to cost you a lot. Like, maybe it is just Rui, and then you do. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, because then if you're Milwaukee, you don't have a center. Like, I guess you're starting Bobby Portis, but that's a downgrade in my opinion in terms of like defense and rim protection and just your overall starting lineup. So I don't know. I like Brook Lopez. I know he's old. I know he's slipped a bit. Wasn't the same level of rim protector and defender last year, but still putting him next to Anthony Davis, that's like, I mean, he's like built in a lab to like, I mean, it's really Brook Lopez and Miles Turner are like the 2 guys who, and Kristaps Porzingis, like those 3 guys as stretch 5s who can also protect the rim. There aren't many of them, and Victor Wembanyama, sure, but like, you're not getting him. DJ Porter, what is the latest with Spencer D? Are the Lakers going to lose him as well? So as I've reported and talked about on here, Spencer Dinwiddie is still a candidate to return to the Lakers. They had been looking at Torian and Spencer as if they could clear that extra roster spot or two, potentially re-signing one of those guys to a taxpayer MLE and then one of those guys to a vet minimum. So Spencer would be a candidate for the taxpayer MLE. And in that case, if you do trade a Gabe or a D'Lo, you can replace them with a guy that, look, like I know Spencer was like a very polarizing player, and I know there are a lot of people that don't want him back, and I totally get that. I will say, like, the stretches we saw, and it was very brief, but the stretches we saw where I think D'Lo missed a game or two, like he played really well offensively, and I feel like there was something about like he never quite figured out the offensive fit next to Austin and D'Lo to the level that the Lakers needed him to be. And obviously he was a dud in the playoffs. And, but if you're looking at a guy like the Lakers need to nail the margins and they need to nail some of these bets on like cheaper guys, and Spencer Dinwiddie potentially for the taxpayer MLE. Like this is a guy who had Spencer Dinwiddie not been traded, I think he's probably getting the non-taxpayer MLE this summer, even with, there's the reports about him quiet quitting in Brooklyn and his effort. And like, that seemed to be a bit of a toxic situation. And he never fully talked about it and sort of explained it. But like Spencer Dinwiddie is a guy who was, I believe the third leading scorer on that Dallas team that made the Western Conference Finals. And yes, that was a couple years ago. He's not the same player, but I still think at like $5 million, that's not like if you empower him and let's say D'Lo is gone and it's like Gabe starting and Spencer off the bench and he is getting a certain amount of offensive usage, I still think he can be an effective player. And like maybe it's a bad bet and maybe it doesn't work out, and I could easily be wrong on that. I just think when you're looking at guys who can outperform their contracts, I think Spencer is one of the few guys remaining who could actually outperform that $5. And look, if you get him on the minimum, that's even better, right? And if you could just say like, hey, we can only offer, and they wouldn't even be paying him $5. I think they'd have to be paying him around like $4 just to fit it under that second apron. But I just, and his minimum anyway would, I think, be around $3. So it's not that much of a difference at that point. It's like $1 million. But, I think Spencer, so I have heard that there is interest in retaining him depending on how things play out. Like, I'm sure the Lakers would prefer a Gary Trent Jr. over a Spencer Dinwiddie. And if that's the case, then you take the GTJ. But if it comes down to like Spencer Dinwiddie or some of these other options, I do think he has a chance to bounce back and overperform relative to his contract, more so than some of these other guys. Let's see. Okay, we got a big one here. Mike V. Thank you. The Lakers might not trade any more future firsts. I think they rebuild in 2027. LeBron retires after 2 seasons, and the Lakers trade AD for assets. The 2027 pick is protected top 4, so they could still tank for the lottery. So not a question here. I think this is more of a prediction from Mike V. I mean, that could happen. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. I think the Lakers would likely, if it plays out this way, I think they would ideally like to find that second star and that was one of the appealing factors about potentially acquiring Donovan Mitchell and why he was one of the few guys on the short list that they would give up a couple of the, both first round picks for, was just like he could bridge that era, or he could bridge the gap into the next era of Lakers basketball. And you could envision in 2026 and 2027 and 2028, Donovan Mitchell with Anthony Davis. That I guess you could still make the case is one of the reasons why Trae Young would be an interesting name, though I think he comes with a lot of potential baggage with just his defense and him being so heliocentric and such a high usage guy that it would be certainly a huge offensive adjustment for him. And then defensively, there's always going to be a level of concern and teams being able to target and really pick on him in the playoffs at a level that even like a guy like it's much worse than D'Lo. Like he's just smaller and he's a worse defender. So I think there are some concerns like a guy like Trae, but I think the Lakers are going to, like, maybe AD asks out at that point, and that had been, as Sam Amick of The Athletic had reported, what is it, a few weeks ago, that one of the factors with the Lakers in terms of moving on from Darvin Ham was them being afraid of Anthony Davis potentially asking out if they did not fire Ham. So maybe AD asks out at that point. And this is just all speculation here, but I think the Lakers would try and find that second star to reload with rather than rebuild, especially because they don't have access to all their first round picks over that stretch. So, but you could be right. I mean, I would say this is trending on the more like pessimistic outcomes of what the Lakers' future could look like. But because even if you tank, there's no guarantee. Like you're just guaranteed a top 5 pick if you're the worst record. You're not even guaranteed a top 3 pick or the best pick, like in other sports. So there's a chance you tank and you still get like the 6th pick, and then that goes to Utah. So the Lakers, like, they will have some incentive to tank, but in this scenario, but I still think they try and go for it. KRock004, hey Jovan, out of all the teams you mentioned the Lakers have talked to, who has the most traction in terms of a potential deal happening? It's a good question. I would say Portland would be the team that has the most traction of it. Like, it's between Portland and Brooklyn. I think in both cases, the haggling comes down to picks, and Portland wanting 2 picks for Jeremy Grant versus the Lakers being only okay with giving up 1, and then Brooklyn wanting a first for each of Dorian Finney-Smith, just combined his last name, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Cam Johnson, and LA not being fully sold on giving up a first for either one of those guys. So really it comes down to the haggling of the picks, and then ultimately like which players LA is sending out, and then matching salary and all. Like there's several like layers to a trade as to sort of like the general framework, and then you get into the more nitty gritty of like salary matching and what that's going to look like on your cap sheet, and which pick are you sending out, and is there protections on that pick, and like can you haggle about I want to protect this pick, but I'd be willing to throw in a second, and like there's just different layers to like how a trade gets worked through and ultimately gets agreed upon. So if I had to pick, I would say Portland and Brooklyn have at least some form of a framework, and it's more so just like what's the ultimate cost, what's the ultimate like picks, and are those picks protected, and how many picks are involved, and like, so I would say that's where Portland or Brooklyn would be the closest, from my understanding. I know Washington and Kuzma, there's been some buzz there, but I think that one, like, it's tricky because I don't think you're gonna send Rui back to Washington, and then that really limits it to like D'Lo. But I don't know. That one's a little trickier, but I think Portland and Brooklyn are cleaner fits in terms of just like the salary matching, and it really just coming down to like which the game of chicken, and which team blinks first, and which team do the Nets lower the price to like a couple seconds, or maybe like a heavily protected first, or do the Blazers lower it to like 1 first, or do the Lakers give in and just say we're going all in, and like here's a first for this guy, or like here's a couple firsts for Jeremy Grant. And that's more so where I see. So I would say one of those two. The Indigenous Nightmare Network. 2 questions. What's the odds of getting Lauri? And if we clear roster spot somehow, is Omer a legit target? I think he would fit well next to AD. I'm not sure who you are saying with. Oh, okay. Yeah. You're at 7. That's an interesting one. He's interesting. I don't think he'd be at the top of my list, but he is. I mean, how tall is he's listed at 6'11", 275. He's a big guy. I'm curious what his shooting numbers are. Looking him up. So he had the 1 year in Miami, 2022-23, shot 43%, pretty low volume, less than 1 attempt per game. It was only 9 games. So his other 2 seasons, 9% and 21%. So the shooting, like in theory, he kind of has the outline of like a 3-and-D center, but the shooting hasn't really been there. So like he's interesting, but I don't know if he's that wouldn't be my top target, depending on like who else is out there. And then odds of Lauri, I think are really low. I think 5%, really like 10%. I just don't think the Lakers have the draft capital ultimately to get them into the conversation of like, again, if they're looking for a Mikal Bridges type package, to me, that means like at least 4 firsts. And even if you're reducing the protections on that 2027 pick, I would say that's like 2.5 firsts. And even then, like half might be generous. So 2.25 firsts. I don't even know. Like it would be nice to have that pick completely unprotected for Utah, but I don't know if that offsets. Like I think there are teams that would legitimately give up at least 3 firsts, if not 4, for Lauri Markkanen. So at that point, and then if you're not like, even if you're trading, like again, I go back to Austin, like even if you're trading Austin, he's not necessarily, I want to say, what, Lauri's 27, Austin's 26. So like you're not even like Austin's not even necessarily on your timeline with some of these younger guys that you have in like their early 20s. Like he's basically the same age as Lauri. And like I guess maybe you flip Austin down the road for something else, but I don't see it. Ali A. Rizvi, appreciate everything. Your prediction for LA trade. So I spoke to this a bit earlier, but I'll reiterate that I think LA is going to do some form of a consolidation trade where they trade at least 1 or 2 minimum guys and attach a second round pick or even a couple of second round picks. Maybe if they're doing a couple of minimum guys to some team with cap space or at least some cap flexibility to take on a couple of guys. Maybe they waive one or both. And that is that. So that is like at a minimum. They are trying to upgrade with a 3-and-D type wing. And again, the names I've reported are Jeremy Grant, Kyle Kuzma, Cam Johnson, and Dorian Finney-Smith. All those guys have varying degrees of shooting and defense levels. And I think Jeremy Grant is clearly the best of the 4, but he's also the most expensive of the 4 in terms of both his contract and the price to get him. So that complicates that. I do think he's the best fit, not only the best player, but the best fit personally. And I think that would elevate the Lakers from maybe the 5th best team to like 3rd or 4th in the West, depending on, again, a lot of factors, health, what else they do with the roster, because potentially you're creating a hole there, especially at guard if you're trading D'Lo, but Portland doesn't want D'Lo. So like you're trading Rui, and then maybe it's Rui and Gabe to match the salary. But then, I mean, and who I like Jeremy Grant, Austin, and D'Lo, like that. He like kind of gives you a lot of what Vando's definitely a better perimeter defender and just a better defender overall, but like gives you a lot of what Vando gives you defensively, but then also is at a different level offensively and is better than Rui offensively. So like Jeremy Grant in theory checks the boxes of, I've talked about like, can you combine Rui and Vando into like one player and like have their basketball baby be that starting small forward? And Jeremy Grant is kind of that guy. Now, I think he would need to take a considerable step back offensively, especially if the Lakers still have Austin and D'Lo. And then, a step back offensively, and then need to really lean into the defensive end and go back to being more of the player he was in OKC and in Denver. And that remains to be seen if he would want to take on that role and want to take a step back. But if he's willing to embrace it and he's serious about winning, and he's shown, because like the thing with him was like he wanted to show, I could be a number 1 guy, I could be a number 2 guy, I could be a 20-point per game scorer. Like I've been in this box as a role player, and he went out and he did it, and he showed in Detroit and now in Portland. Like he can get you 18 to 22 points a night, but you're going to be a lottery team, and you're going to be one of the worst teams in the league if Jeremy Grant is your best player and your primary player. So if you slot him as your number 3 or even your number 4, depending on how you view things with Austin and with D'Lo, I like that a lot more. And then if he can really lean into the defensive end, and he's the guy taking on the primary assignments at the 3 and the 4, and maybe even some 2s depending on the team, I like that. So I would say, some type of trade to upgrade on the wing and the perimeter is what the Lakers are looking to do. Whether they can actually do it, whole other conversation. And, based on the last couple of years, like I'm a little skeptical that they get it done, but we shall see. Okay. Another question here from Is He a Real One Radio? Vada. Why don't we hear more about Seth Curry? I mean, he's another guy who's just kind of aging out of the league. I mean, apparently, when he got waived by Charlotte, they were already talking about re-signing him and sort of restructuring the deal. I do like, in theory, I like him. I don't think the Lakers necessarily need another small guard unless they trade Gabe or D'Lo. Otherwise, I think like the backcourt is pretty much set there. You don't need another small guard. But you need help on the wings and in the front court, particularly at the 5 spot. So Seth Curry, like he's one of these guys that I feel like he looks better on paper than he actually is, and that's my kind of quick take on that. Like he's a defensive liability. He's still a good shooter, but he's not like that quick shooter that you necessarily need. Like I don't know. I think he's like kind of like he's kind of fallen out of the rotation the last few places he's been. And he'll have like the one game where he hits like 6 threes and then he looks really good, but I don't think he does that consistently enough. And I think at this point he's more of like a back end rotation guy, if even that, and just not what the Lakers need, in my opinion. I think that is all the super chat questions. So I'm going to, I see Tyler K asked, do you think we do any trades? So if any trade related question, I'll just keep going back to consolidation trade and then maybe a trade for a wing. Question from George_Santiago. Any idea backstory on LeBron pay cut and why they made it public? Hope the rehab is going well. You're to be reevaluated in September. So what George is referring to is I had tore my Achilles back in October, had surgery in November, and I'm close to like 80%, I would say. I'm getting back there, starting to jog a little bit, do a little bit of running, not back to playing basketball yet. But I got a wedding coming up. I'm getting married in 2 months. So I need to try and get the full range of motion back so I could be out on the dance floor, enjoying myself. Idea backstory on the LeBron pay cut and why they made it public. I think it was posturing to some extent. I think it was putting some pressure on the front office to do something. And it was a pretty short list and frankly, a rather unrealistic list because you had 2 guys in Klay Thompson and DeMar DeRozan who don't want to sign for the non-taxpayer MLE. A guy, James Harden, who just signed for almost 3 times the amount of the non-taxpayer MLE. And a guy, Jonas Valanciunas, who quickly agreed to a deal with the Wizards early in free agency. So you had to think that was already in the works. That one to me I was always like, I don't see LeBron taking a pay cut for Jonas Valanciunas when like he's one of those. He just I don't know how much he would have actually helped the Lakers, especially with his defensive limitations. So yeah, I mean, I think part of it was just posturing for it makes him look good, right? Like to some extent. And sometimes, I mean, when you kind of trace certain things getting reported or coming out, it's like, and look, I think he would have taken it for those guys. I just think it was a high bar of you really had to convince a Klay or a DeMar to take a steep pay cut when those guys already view themselves as taking pay cuts as like 15 to 20 million, which is more than that. And then again, Jonas seemed like he already had something going on. And then James Harden was never going to sign for the non-taxpayer. So the list, and Brian Windhorst of ESPN had reported there was another name that we didn't hear. I still don't have clarity on like what that name was, but it was a very difficult list to actually make happen. But I think it was a form of posturing, PR, whatever you want to call it. Let's see. Norma Maldonado doing great, Jovan. Hey everyone, we have over 550 watching. Let's show support and hit the like button. It's free. Yes, please be sure to like this and be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Welcome. If you're returning, thank you for coming back, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. I should have been plugging that throughout, but I'm just trying to answer you guys' questions. I think that is all of the. Okay, here we go. Another one from Teeks. what do you think about a trade for Io and Vucevic? I think we can make a trade package to make some roster space, and Vucevic's contract isn't that crazy. Vucevic, it comes back to like defensively isn't great, and I personally haven't like. I think part of the reason why JaVale McGee and Dwight were so effective next to Anthony Davis is because statistically they were two of the better rim protectors in the league that season. And I'm sure playing next to Anthony Davis is going to make you a better defender, but those guys were really good shot blockers. I mean, they had that one game against Detroit where all three of them combined for, I think a couple other guys got blocks, but like the team has, they had like 20, 21 blocks. It was like some record for a team for like X amount of years. And like that team was elite at rim protecting and just being, protecting the interior and that size and that length. So Vucevic to me is like, it's similar to, like a Clay, like the imperfect fit of like a Clay Thompson or like a DeMar DeRozan, where offensively it's going to work. Like he can space the floor. He can play inside. He can play outside. Like I actually really like the offensive fit. He can be a DHO guy. He could be a screener, hit guys in the short roll. Like he has declined a bit, especially since his Orlando days. But like Vucevic offensively, I think would be a really solid fit. It's the defense to me, and I just don't think, especially if you're trading for him, you are basically you're starting him most likely, and you're giving 28 to 32 minutes to him at a minimum, and to give that to a guy who's like at best an average rim protector, and I'm probably being nice there. I would say overall a below average rim protector and a below average defender. I don't love that. I do like Io, and that's I guess the more appealing part of this trade. But I don't the Vucevic part I'm not as sold on. And again, another USC guy, but I'm just trying to call it like it is. Grape is this grape swishers. They're good. Plinka usually operates in the shadows. What's your prediction for dark horse move? Well, the problem is making the prediction for the dark horse move. That's why it's a dark horse move. Now, I will say there's been times I've wondered if the Lakers telegraphing that they're not going after a third star, it means they're actually going after a third star, and we just don't. And now look, like the stars are dropped like flies. Like DeJounte Murray got traded, Donovan Mitchell re-signed, Trae Young switched agencies, and I've heard that's certainly a factor here. Of then they also added Nate McMillan, who he does not have the best relationship, let's just say, with from Atlanta. So I think there's a lot of signs that Trae Young is unlikely to come. Maybe Darius Garland. He's a guy who has clutch connections, and there had been reporting from The Athletic at the time of when Cleveland was eliminated that if Donovan Mitchell signed that extension, that Darius Garland would potentially ask out and potentially look to be the primary ball handler in a different situation. Now, I think Darius Garland is a really good player. He's not at the level of a Donovan Mitchell and a Trae Young. So, and then he comes with a certain level of defensive concerns as well. And if you are like, I think ideally if the Lakers are trading both first round picks, whoever that player is, it either has to be like a top 20 guy, which is where like a Mitchell comes in, or it has to be someone that can shoot and defend and is a plus two-way guy. And those players just don't grow on trees. And the cost in some cases is over 2 first round picks. And even so, like if there really is a bidding war and like Darius Garland's on the market, I think you're going to get more than you're probably going to get more than 2 first round picks for him. So I think with the way the market has been reset with some of these trades, like feels like any star level player is going to go for at least 3 firsts, if not more. And that's just where the Lakers, I think, are a little bit capped with like the Mikal Bridges trade was not good for the Lakers of just it set a certain price and a certain precedence. Okay, we keep getting. I'm gonna do a couple more here. Tim Tucker, odds we make a trade before next Monday. It's really tough to say because again, as I said earlier, the Lakers don't have to make a trade by tomorrow. I think there's a misconception, some misinformation out that they have to. Like they can be patient. They don't have to sign Max Christie. Like LeBron had wanted to sign by tomorrow for Team USA for a couple of reasons. One, just so it's off his plate, he doesn't have to think about it. He could focus on the Olympics and really lock in with that. And two, if he's playing in a competitive situation, there's always a chance of risk of injury, and you don't want to risk that of potentially getting injured, and then you don't have a contract, and you're dragging it out, and all of a sudden now the Lakers, I'm sure they would sign him to a still a good contract, but like you don't want to lose that leverage and it potentially be like, well, you didn't, you were dragging us out and you didn't sign, and now you got injured, and now you're coming back asking for a contract, and like that could just get messy, and that's a situation that neither side wants to engage with. So the logical thing was, if LeBron was not going to take a pay cut and LeBron was not going to go elsewhere, that he obviously was just going to re-sign for the max. So I think that's from the LeBron side, like why there was a bit of a deadline coming up with Saturday. As far as Max Christie, the Lakers don't have to sign him tomorrow, and really should try to at least make a trade before they sign him. So if I had to guess, I would say like it's always tough when making these like percentage guesses, but like 35%, I would still put it under 50% that they make a trade, but like a decent number, but not more likely than not, because I think the odds of them just making a trade in the next couple of days is probably lower. But come summer league, like I think they will likely have made a trade by then, at a minimum, a consolidation trade. So I would say 35% if I had to guess by like Monday, but because again, they don't have to do it. Question from Pasalanka 16. More power, JB. What about Wendell Carter from Orlando? I like this, and I will give a shout out to Lakers Nation for coming up with this trade idea, but and shout out to specifically Trevor Lane. I mean, it seems like Orlando is like trying to be competitive though, and Wendell Carter is a good player on a good contract, and I don't see them like. It seems like they're going for it. I mean, they signed KCP, they extended Jonathan Isaac, they just had the monster extension for Franz. So like, I think they're trying to go for it, and like if the Lakers are. I don't even know if a first necessarily gets it done for Wendell. Like I'm sure if they put 2 firsts on the table, Orlando would strongly consider that, but I don't think the Lakers would do that. And I don't think Wendell is that caliber of like a 2 first guy, but I think it's sort of like, to my knowledge, they're not necessarily looking to shop him. I think if he was available, and I could be wrong. Like I haven't heard, I know from fans and like fan fantasy trades, like he's been a top target. I personally have not heard him attached to the Lakers when I have conversations with people. So maybe that is the dark horse trade, and the Lakers can land him. But I think I don't know if a first gets it done, especially when to quote Rob's comments at the trade deadline, like you can't purchase a house that's not for sale. This is a situation where I think you'd be trying to purchase a house that's not necessarily for sale, and to get that, you have to overbid, and you have to give Orlando an offer they can't refuse, and that's probably 2 firsts. But I would not do that personally for Wendell. Question from Matt: why don't we target Sexton, Kessler, and Grant? Well, so they are targeting Grant, and they've had conversations with Utah. I haven't gotten great clarity as to the targets, but I would assume, based on who's theoretically available with Utah and what the Lakers need, that if they're trading like a D'Lo, like let's say they're doing a 3 or 4 team trade, and now we're getting complicated, and it's unlikely they swing like that size of a trade. But let's just say here they're giving up D'Lo and Rui and Vando and Gabe. Like you're going to need another guard back, so that's where Sexton would make sense from Utah. Kessler, you get your starting 5 or backup 5 that can play 20, 25, even 30 minutes. And Grant, you get your starting small forward or power forward, however you want to split it up with him and LeBron. So like, I think, that I mean, if you like, that plugs all 3 holes, right? I was talking earlier, hole in the wing, a hole in the interior, and a potential hole in the backcourt. If you trade D'Lo, you go 3, like you get all 3, but it's almost certainly going to take, it's going to take both first round picks at a minimum. You're going to have to throw in some swaps, most likely, because theoretically you're sending Utah first, you're sending Portland a first. Portland's going to want more than a first, so you have to sweeten the pot, maybe a couple swaps in there. I mean, it's possible. Like, this is probably on the higher end of like outcomes for LA this offseason, but there's also just a matter of like, would Portland accept less than 2 firsts for Grant? What would be like, does Utah want a first for Sexton and a first for Kessler? Like, it gets a little complicated, but on paper, in theory, like I like where your head's at, and this would check the 3 theoretical holes on this roster. A couple more questions here. Homie _2 cent. Any concern for Braun and AD playing for Team USA? Yeah, I have a little bit of concern, especially with looking at Austin Reeves and the Lakers. Now, granted, Austin kind of hit a wall in both of, hit a little bit of a wall his rookie year, hit a little bit of a wall his sophomore year, more so in like the playoffs, and then certainly hit a wall to start this third year. But going deep into May with the Lakers playing the Nuggets and in the conference finals, and then going basically straight into, or shortly having a couple weeks off, 2-3 weeks off, and then shortly going into Team USA mini camp, like it was not a lot of time for Austin. And he was also dealing with his contract and that whole situation. Then the Taylor Swift rumors, and he's on billboards and he's getting all these endorsements and all these different opportunities. And so last summer was the rise of Austin Reeves, the rise of the celebrity of Austin Reeves. But I think part of the kind of reason for that slow start was how much he played with Team USA and just not really getting a break last summer. And AD has talked about more often than not, he takes like a month off directly from the end of the season. Then he'll start working out again and getting back into shape and just, kind of ramping up for training camp. LeBron basically doesn't take time off. LeBron's just a machine. But I would say, I mean, honestly, I probably am more concerned with LeBron than AD, just because I think LeBron needs a little bit of a break. I mean, going to be age 40, year 22, like that's a guy you don't want to overtax. But that's also where I think hopefully he and Team USA can kind of work together on like not overtaxing him in terms of how much he's playing or how much he's practicing. Like they can be conservative with him just because they don't necessarily even need him. Like he's going to start, he's going to play a big role, but they're going to be fine, with or without LeBron playing like 30 minutes versus 20. It's by far the best team in the Olympics. So I think, of course, like it's going to be fun to see LeBron with Steph and KD and Kawhi and AD and Jason Tatum and all these guys that are on the roster. But I would say like I have a little bit more concern with LeBron than AD just because of his age and that just, but who, I mean, you could also kind of view it the other way of like, if he never really shuts off this offseason, like maybe it kind of keeps it going. And because sometimes with older guys, like one of the things that happens, and you can kind of go through like there's just the random summer where you just lose it. And I remember covering Paul Pierce entering his season with the Clippers, and it was like, I want to say season before he was with the Wizards, and that was, remember, like he was kind of like a stretch 4 with the Wizards, and he had the shot where he's like, I called game, or I called bank, or whatever it was. Like he had a game-winning shot in the playoffs, and like he was still like a solid role player, a solid starter. And over that summer, he just lost it, and all of a sudden looked like a guy who like couldn't play and was not a rotation guy. So of course, LeBron's a unicorn. LeBron is something we've never seen before, and I don't foresee LeBron having that type of drop off. But even if LeBron goes from like his current level to like 3 to 5% worse, that does, I think, affect the Lakers like championship aspirations, just because they need LeBron and AD as good as possible. Cause like, I think the one way the Lakers can punch above their weight and potentially go on a finals run or win a championship is just LeBron and AD being like the best players in any given series. And they have that potential, but to actually get it done is a different situation. So I would say actually I have a little bit more concern with LeBron than AD. Of course, with AD, there's always the injury concern, and that would be like a worst case scenario is like AD gets injured in the Olympics. But I think for AD, it might even be a benefit, because he's talked about taking a lot of time off in the summer, and maybe he's a guy who, playing through that and not taking as much time off, maybe that does him benefits, and he comes into the season in a better rhythm. So I think it could go either way depending on how you view it in terms of like pros versus cons. But I would say with LeBron, just him being 40 and him probably needing a little bit more rest than he's accustomed to in previous off seasons. That would be my one thing. That'd be my one thing. But no one knows their body as well as LeBron. So yeah. Couple more. Trey rumors dead. Could Lakers get a solid big? Trey rumors are not dead entirely, but close to dead. Lakers get a solid big. I mean, it depends what your definition of a solid big is. I think Brook Lopez is a solid big. I think they could probably swing that depending on the pick that they're willing to put in and the protections. I would have loved Miles Turner on this team. I think if we go back and look at I think the Lakers would have honestly been in probably a better position had they traded for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. Not to relitigate that trade, but it also would have been at the beginning of the season, so they're not multiple games under 500 when they at the trade deadline. They're not in 13th place in the West, and have to exert all this energy to make this crazy turnaround just to get to the 7th seed. I think there's a chance that they are just better and have more continuity, have more reps together. And that's a whole other topic. But I would Miles Turner is someone I would I think he'd be a great fit next to AD. It's just, I don't see that happening. So solid big, again, it really depends on your definition of what that looks like. But maybe, I think it seems like Brook Lopez is the most realistic guy out there right now on the trade market. And then, there's some cheaper guys that could be available, like Day'Ron Sharpe in Brooklyn, like a potential DFS and Day'Ron or Cam and Day'Ron that's been a package that's been floated out there. And then last question here, because I got to go I went over. I said I was going to go 45 minutes. We're at 120. I appreciate you all for tuning in. But I do have a flight to catch to the California Classic. I'm going to be there tomorrow and Sunday for the debuts of Bronny James and Dalton Connect. And it's an early game tomorrow. It's a 1:30 game. So I do have to go. But last one here from Justin Tyndall. Pelinka has shown he doesn't want to trade first except for Westbrook trade. What percentage that Pelinka runs it back? This is a good question because I do think there is an increased likelihood that the Lakers run it back at least to start the season. I do expect them to make some type of trade either within the next few weeks or closer to the trade deadline. It's just a matter of timing. I don't think this is going to be the roster that they February 8th, I think, is the first day after the trade deadline. I don't think this is going to be the roster on February 8th. I think, again, there'll be a consolidation trade, and then there's a whole other matter of do they do some type of bigger trade. But what I will say is I think just given the lack of interest in most of the Lakers trade assets outside of those 2 picks and Austin Reeves, and now they're going to re-sign Max Christie. They can't trade him until January 15th. So he's off the books for, he's I think Max Christie would have interest in, and you could technically do a sign and trade, but Lakers like Max Christie. They believe in him. They want him to be a rotation guy next year. So looking at it, if you really are trying to trade D'Lo and Gabe and Vando and Rui, all those guys, I think there are very few teams that would view all of those guys as positives. I think their values are very team by team and circumstantial, and finding the right suitor to take on at least a couple of those guys without attaching both picks. I think, again, it depends on what you're getting back. But if for any upgrade, substantial upgrade, high level starter, it's going to be tough to not trade both first round picks, both for the value of that player and also the perceived negative value of some of the contracts that the Lakers are trading. So that's the one argument for them standing pat and being patient. Now, again, I'll push back with what I said earlier of I think the Lakers have to stop going into seasons being we're going to make, we know we have to make a trade by February, just because I think that's it takes a toll on guys and guys are in trade rumors and it weighs on you. So I think they need to try to build out the roster as soon as possible and ideally build it out in the offseason. And then if you have a hole or you have an injury or whatever, then you can make a trade at the trade deadline or in January. But to go into the season saying yeah, we love D'Lo and Austin together when privately you don't, and you've been trying to trade D'Lo since last season and then all summer, it's just not going to work. And D'Lo can see through that. I think the guys in the locker room can see through that. We as the media can see through that. The fans can see through that. And it's just not believable. So I think if the Lakers run it back entering the season, I do expect them to make a move at some point during the season. But again, I think it's a faulty logic to just be
well, we'll solve this problem in January or February, because now you're wasting half the season with a group that's not going to actually be the group you try and compete with. And you have guys looking over their shoulders for roles, for minutes, for trade value, and just all this stuff. So I think it does ultimately more harm than good for the Lakers to stand pat. And again, you don't want to just throw away your picks. Those picks have value. But at some point, you have to make a decision of, are we going for it or not? And I think if you have LeBron James re-signing and you have LeBron and AD, you have a 1 to 2 year window, I think you got to go for it. But that'll do it for this live stream. I appreciate all of you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and like and comment under this video. I think there might have been a couple super chats that I didn't get to. So if you comment on this video, and for those people that I didn't get, I mean, there's a lot of questions I didn't get to, please comment under this video and I'll try to continue to answer more questions in the chat. But I do have to go take a flight right now. But thank you for watching and listening. And this was really fun. This was the biggest audience I've had for a live stream. So I will make sure to do it again soon. I tend to get in trouble with these. I'm hoping I don't get in trouble and say something I should, but this was fun. So I will talk to you guys soon.